Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Big5D Podcast. I'm here with Brenton Naicker, CVVC, which is a blockchain-focused venture firm. Tell us quickly about CVVC, and then we'll talk about blockchain in Africa.
Brilliant. So, thanks for having me, Charles. We always have brilliant discussions. So now I guess everybody else will get to hear them. So CVVC, we're a VC. Everyone knows about Silicon Valley. We're really famous for starting this ecosystem called Crypto Valley, which is, the equivalent of the blockchain space. And we've been pretty active investing in Africa over the last year or so.
Okay. Now, the Crypto Valley you refer to is actually in Switzerland, right?
Correct.
Zug, which is a beautiful city on a lake, I believe. I've not been there. It looks amazing.
It is. We'll have to get you out to the conference next year, but yeah.
I would love to. That would be awesome. Okay. Any rate, so we're here to talk a little bit about sort of blockchain in Africa and what its future looks like. Before we do that, I can't do this without sort of saying, what's your take on what's been going on? There's been this thing crashing and that thing crashing, and a lot of people who aren't in crypto, whether they're regulators or journalists or elected officials around the world, beating up on crypto. Give us a quick state of play from your point of view before we get into sort of the Africa-specific questions.
Well, I think that's something we could probably have a whole podcast on.
Of course we could. Yeah. But I'm asking for a couple minutes on it.
I think, look, I think it was this sort of black swan confluence of factors that really led to this contagion that almost sort of stemmed from the wider macro environment, plus some of the bad actors in the space. And it really is just an isolated few cases of really, really poor risk management by human beings, to be quite honest. And if people in very, very deep in the crypto space always like to bash the traditional financial markets and regulation, etc. But I think some of these parameters that they allow different market actors, whether they be hedge funds or custodians, etc., to operate within are to prevent things exactly like what we saw. A lot of people were behaving pretty much, in summary, like the market was only going to go up and to the right forever. And because of that, they employed a lot of risk. And, once one domino started falling in the space, whether it was bad actors or not, it just started this contagion where we saw there were a lot of threads through which a lot of crypto companies had, a lot of commonalities. So I do think it's temporary. It's just a case of some very bad risk management, some very bad actors in the space. But, this is, I guess, what happens when you try to build the future in real time.
Okay, we could, like you said, we could devote a whole podcast to unpacking what you just said. When you say temporary, is temporary in glacial terms, or temporary in another time frame? What does temporary mean in your view, or what does it feel like to you?
So I've sort of got two specific views, right? And the one is obviously the one everybody wants to know about, crypto, Twitter, etc., and that's price action. And I think, by and large, however much you want to separate crypto from the bunch, it behaves very much just like another asset class, by and large. There's a lot of speculative trading going on. And because of that, we've seen this very deep correlation to traditional markets. So temporary from a price action perspective, to me, in my opinion, not financial advice.
Of course. I'll start the podcast with none of this is financial advice. Okay.
None of this is financial advice. Thank you. You saved me. So look, I think we're going to start we've seen some really exciting activity today, but more sustained long-term sort of value accruing to the crypto space once we see that turnaround in the traditional macro perspective, right? Once we see the Fed starting, to hit terminal rates, starting to cut, we see looser sort of liquidity situations globally. And I think just like all other assets, a rising tide, raises all ships. From a price action perspective, that's when temporary.
So there's been no fundamental change there as you see it. Yeah, the connection to the macro conditions. Okay, fair enough.
No, very much so, very much so. And on the other view of temporary, I think that because of some of the actions of the bad actors we spoke about, is regulators around the world are now taking a very, very serious view on how to appropriately approach the sector. And it's, in their defense, it's not something where you wake up and you're like, hey, we need to protect people. Cool, this is what we do. Let's write down, 3 rules. I think it is going to take a lot of engagement from them, from the industry, but once they get it right and we have clear rules for people to play the game with, just to be sort of simplistic.
As in securities, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then you've got these sort of, oversight over the risk practices of some of these players, etc. I think then we'll start to see more innovations coming back to the space. Really exciting things in DeFi, really exciting things in the NFT space. We've still seen, despite the sort of price action and negativity, we've still seen a lot of corporate partnerships in the space, a lot of the traditionals. I mean, Polygon is one of our partners in Africa. I mean, if you follow them, they're partnering with another unicorn or billion-dollar traditional company every other week. Okay. So I think that the underlying fundamentals of the industry is growing. People are using it. They're building useful things. But again, I think we sort of saw this temporary setback being the bad actors causing a lot of, scrutiny on the space. But once things get cleared out, smoke clears, I think we start racing forward again.
Okay, and you think that's in 2023?
Oh, to be honest,
hard to predict. Hard to predict.
I mean, regulators are not known for moving as
well. The regulatory thing could, if it's hinged on that, my guess is just based on the pace things typically move at. That doesn't seem likely.
Doesn't seem likely. Exactly. Probably looking at 2025.
Okay, that's fair. We'll take that signal to pivot to what we really want to talk about today, which is kind of what you do, which is finding companies that are using, if I'm putting words in your mouth, stop me, but finding companies using blockchain to solve real world African problems and helping them grow, right? Close enough?
No, that was, I'd say 99%. And it's actually true, but the way that's pretty much our thesis in the line, but the way we phrase it is that are solving African or emerging market problems. So we see a lot of
that's a slight amendment, right? Yeah.
Slight amendment, but you would have definitely got an A on that one.
Okay. African and which suggests that CVVC has not an African focus, which I know is not. The firms only, but an emerging market focus. Is that fair?
Correct. Right.
Okay. You've got an accelerator program underway, right? Could you tell us about that very quickly?
Oh, it's brilliant. So applications are open if any founders are listening until the 15th of Jan. So I don't know when this is going to be published.
Barely within that. But if you can give them a 1 or 2 day extension, if they say they heard the podcast. If you mention
Big5 Podcast, we will give you a 2-day extension. It's an accelerator where we plug you into our network in Africa, which includes people like, the biggest exchange being Vala, Standard Bank, who's doing some amazing work in this space. But the real value add is our network out in Zug, which is known as Crypto Valley, which, includes the biggest protocols in the world from Cardano to Ethereum. And that's something as an investor specifically that there is no one else on the continent really who can expose you to that network. Of course, the other part is that we're quite passionate about is our deal terms are exactly the same as the founders we invest in New York, out in London, and that's $135,000 for 7%, which is very competitive according to.
That sounds very Y Combinator-ish.
You literally took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say, but sometimes referred to as the YC of blockchain and Web3.
Okay. Got it. All right, moving on. So the meat of what I was interested in discussing is sort of why is Africa an interesting place for startups using blockchain to solve problems. Could you talk a little bit about what it is about Africa? And I know Africa is a collection of many countries. It's not one country. I understand all of that, but it is often talked about as a market, fairly or unfairly. So, you can talk about it within certain parts of Africa or however you want to talk about it. But why is Africa so interesting for applying blockchain to solve problems? And is it beyond just payments? But we can talk about that, but let's talk about it more broadly than that.
No, and look, it's and this is exactly why, we've got this global fund, but we decided to really take foothold and do something special in Africa is, funny enough, we had this conversation with a few investors a couple of weeks back. And we used a really, really great analogy with one of our portfolio companies. So the wider answer is there's firstly the demographic situation in Africa, which isn't unique to blockchain, but it definitely leads to a better environment to build these new technologies. And when I speak about, I speak about the fact that we've got the youngest population, globally, at about 19 years old. Europe, I think, is about 55. So
that's a slight difference.
If you're trying to introduce a new tech to a 19-year-old and a 55-year-old, and then you've got all these other compounded things, the increasing mobile penetration, digital penetration, and that's not unique to us. But why Africa and blockchain are sort of a perfect marriage is because if you look to where those really developed markets are, Europe, America, where there's a lot of this activity happening in the blockchain and crypto space, it's exchanges, it's financial products, it's people speculating.
Built around trading, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just this asset class. But if you come back to the data from a number of the reports, Chain Analysis, Hootsuite Digital 2020, myself spending 2 years at the helm of the biggest exchange in the world in terms of Africa, you see Africans, one, adopting cryptocurrency at a far more rapid rate, and two, utilizing it in a very, very different way. I.e., they're using it for payments. And I always tell the story because it blows my mind. There's 40-year-old merchants, street merchants in Nigeria who can tell you what is the best network to send them USDT on to minimize the gas fees, or basically make the transaction as cheap and fast as possible. And that level of adoption and knowledge was just gained out of necessity. And that, speaks to the specific why Africa and blockchain, because things like financial inclusion, where there's billions of unbanked people, where, things like one of our portfolio companies are solving, where property records are kept separately and in filing cabinets on 50-year-old piece of paper somewhere, which leads to, massive property fraud, where at sometimes you can't the government can't even answer the question, who owns that house over there?
Right.
And those
if a candle tips over and lights those papers on fire,
it's a free-for-all. Exactly. Those houses technically don't belong to anyone there.
Right.
And these are things that are, one, Africa has, it's a problem that is large enough to be solved significantly. So it has the addressable market and the problems, I think we're one.
So what I would really love is, like, it doesn't have to be a comprehensive list, but some specific problems. You just said problems. Let's get a short list of those, the biggest problems that blockchain is uniquely suited to solve.
Perfect. So, I think the one that is really easy to understand, and to be honest, you touched on it a bit earlier, with fintech, is the lowest hanging fruit, and that's remittances, right? For those who don't know, currently sub-Saharan Africa, worst place to remit money to in the world. It's the most expensive.
Yeah, the costs are way up there. Yeah.
The costs are ridiculous. And, as a South African, some of you will know these not mobile money, but money remittance services at like Pick and Pay, at our retail outlets. The charges there are sometimes 15, 25%. And if you look at the user base, right, sophisticated people were booking Forex on our banking app. They're sending, the little bit extra that they can home to mom in a village. So that 25% is a significant value to just be extracted. But if you look at cryptocurrency and the liquidity in local markets in Nigeria and Kenya and South Africa, it is completely possible right now, as we sit here today, to buy a synthetic dollar as a US citizen, remit that to Nigeria in 15 minutes for free. In fact, because of local premiums, you'd actually end up sending the person more money. They'd get more money in Africa.
Because less of it is taken in fees. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's almost instantaneous. It can be accessed by anyone, and they can cash out local currency very easily thanks to some of these sort of local players.
That's amazing. Is there a company? Can you give me a couple brands that are doing this now, or is this something that still hasn't? And is there any user training involved to make this widespread? Kind of talk about adoption barriers, if that's
brilliant. Yeah. So I think you touched on one, and so the sort of proof was that people went and upskilled themselves utilizing all these different third parties, right? Just because the benefit was so obvious, Bob would tell Sally, who would tell Mary, and they would help each other. And this is obviously a barrier to mass adoption because those user experiences, they aren't built for the average person, right? It's quite complex. You need a cryptocurrency exchange account. And we've seen certain companies like building inter-African corridors and starting with those. One is our portfolio company, Mazuma. They're combining mobile money and these blockchain rails to make remittance between certain countries like Ghana and Nigeria almost instant, almost free. And obviously what they're doing is exactly that. They're abstracting that whole complex user experience. They're plugging those third parties in the back end, and they're creating a business where, the average person can pick up their phone, link their bank account, click, I want to send 500 Kenyan shillings to this person, and click a button and it's done. Okay. So a lot of what we're seeing, again, like you said, is in the payments, fintech space.
Outside of that, now, for example, one thing I keep hearing about is identity management and the blockchain being a match made in heaven. And I don't know if there's anything going around in Africa around that topic. That's one I thought I had, but what are some other non-fintech use cases for blockchain that you see either happening now or that you think will be happening soon?
Absolutely. So there's a couple areas that really excite me. I mean, this is fintech, payments, remittances, the low-hanging fruits. To be honest, the majority of our deal flow that we see is within that at the moment. Okay. But the areas where we are seeing some deal flow, and we've invested, and that I'm personally really excited about is, I think, counterfeit medicine and pharmaceuticals. So blockchain's ability to act as the sort of provenance record within a supply chain is very well known. IBM's doing some amazing work with it. But in Africa, the problem of counterfeit pharmaceuticals on one hand, and then digital records that are sort of ubiquitously available. Again, come back to this recording system. This hospital has your file on a piece of paper, and then you get sick in the city next door, and there's nothing you can really do. So I think that's a problem that this technology is very well positioned to solve. Sort of eradicating counterfeits within that supply chain, creating, and the medical records would fall under a use case of digital identity. But one that's a little bit more exciting is, I think over the last couple of years, we've seen this sort of wave of uptake globally of African art. Everything from music. I mean, I'm a piano is
this going to be about NFTs?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You can't forget the M word and the metaverse.
Okay, gotcha. Carry on. We were going to get there sooner or later.
Exactly. But at least you can see where we're going. Okay, I think that's a good thing. I mean, so from that perspective, we've seen a lot of these creators blow up abroad. But unless you're, signed by Sony and you're in that upper echelon 1%, you can't go and do a concert in Madison Square Garden. Right. But with this technology, an artist can produce digital renditions, use a marketplace like OpenSea, platforms like Twitter, and they can create a global audience they can monetize. And the same goes for different forms of art. Musicians, one of our portfolio companies, Soda World, they allow artists to create these live music experiences for an audience sitting in Berlin in Germany, from their lounge in a township in Cape Town. Okay. And I think as African culture becomes more popular globally, I think this technology is going to allow a huge array of artists in Africa to really benefit and grow and monetize their talents.
So why isn't that happening faster? What are the barriers to that? Because I know creators would love to, monetize more efficiently and more directly to their audience, right? With their audience, from their audience, whatever. It doesn't seem to be happening as fast as you would think the demand for that happening would dictate. So tell me, what do you think the barriers are there?
Look, I think there's a number of different barriers. I mean, if we look at it a little bit wider, we've become addicted in the crypto space to the sort of like instant gratification idea. And if we look at
it doesn't make that better, it makes it worse.
Exactly. I mean, it's literally like you invest in a cryptocurrency today and tomorrow, why can't I buy a Lamborghini yet?
Right.
And a lot of that, I think, culture or mindset has sort of perpetuated into the different industry verticals. And what I mean by that is we look at NFTs and metaverse as an area where a significant amount of resources have been dedicated, whether it's human resources, whether it's capital. It's only been a couple of years, right? And I think the same is true for the GameFi and the play to earn space. And I can't say this for certain, but I'm sure a lot of industries in the first 2-3 years had really clunky solutions that probably didn't work. And I think that really is where we are at the moment is,
Okay.
the idea is there, the vision's there, but we've just got to let executors, give them some time to execute.
So somebody has to build the right solution to solve this issue. Is this now a good time to get the creators excited about what's coming? Because I'm not sure all creators are thinking this way. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Funny enough, we actually saw a lot more excitement around this specific area and a lot more deal flow as well pre-COVID.
Okay.
And I think for artists specifically, I really, sympathize with them. I think COVID was a really, really difficult time for artists and people
in general, but okay.
In general, yeah. And when
you can't perform, it's tough. Yeah. It's really when YouTube is your only venue, it's tough, right?
It's tough. Yeah. And I think what that's done is two things. One, a lot of people have become very disillusioned in the space. But two, it's accelerated a very small portion of people who realized the potential of this technology to solve that issue. And they've been building and they've been working. But again, it's only been 2-3 years. Okay. And I think there are some grassroots movements, but until we start to see something significant, it might be, another 2 or 3 years. And COVID definitely, in my opinion, threw a spanner in that timeline.
Okay. What did COVID do? Didn't COVID accelerate the development on the fintech side? Not just the blockchain, but everything else. So you're saying it has slowed development on the sort of the Web3 creator economy stuff. Correct me at any point if I'm throwing that in too fast, but
No, not necessarily. I feel like it's left a lot of artists specifically who would have been engaging more passionately with this new medium, just very disillusioned in general.
So your audience kind of left.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or like
you got to bring them back in order. So is bringing them is bringing that audience back, making them excited again. I think what I heard you say is that is going to be dependent on building the right thing to get them back. Is that fair? Okay. And doesn't exist right now in your view.
In my view, not that I've seen. I think it may be out there somewhere, but it hasn't come across our desk yet. So if that's you building it, bring it to our desk.
Okay. Maybe this are there any other things you would add that are big, exciting coming up? So, I mean, things over time you hear about, I mentioned the sort of identity management that we touched on that a little, at least tangentially. The other thing I hear about is like democracy being accelerated by blockchain because it makes voting safer and easier in a digital format and more reliable. Is anyone building anything around? Because I hear that a lot. Okay.
You know what?
And I've never heard of anyone specifically building a voting solution around blockchain. I
know that they've actually been, and the specific locations escape my mind at the moment. So I might find it and send it to you afterwards, and you can put it in the appendix. But there are some production systems that utilize technology. So i.e. they've been used in actual votes around the world. In some of those more developed countries, if memory serves me correct. But I think I had an interesting discussion about this in Africa, specifically with a gentleman from another African country. And, we came to a very good point that, it's a killer use case specifically for Africa where we see.
Yeah, I thought Africa would be a emerging markets generally, but yeah.
But if you look at the nature and magnitude of the other problems we have that are probably
it falls down the list. It falls down
the list. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's a really great use case, but there's just and I don't want to get rubbed out after this, but from a political standpoint, I just think there's a lot more bigger problems that they need to solve.
Okay, so everything we talked about up to this point, once those are nailed, then voting will be on part two. It'll be
Part two.
chapter
Once we
two
get
of
the currency
blockchain
stable,
knocking off every problem.
we get the youth employment sorted,
Okay.
all of that, then we can come back to the
You
voting.
just said youth employment. That may have been a throwaway line for you, but is there a blockchain application that helps with youth employment that you can think of?
So not one of the things that I'm quite passionate about, and we try to do some work in this space on our ecosystem business side, is and when I speak to this, I speak from a very South African lens, but I know of successful cases of this in a lot of countries like Kenya, etc. And it's not that the technology itself is in some way going to revolutionize the ability to become employed, but what I do have a strong belief is setting up the fundamentals. Is we've got this huge problem in South Africa of youth unemployment,
right?
And if you look at the only solutions to that, we've already got, by other people's opinions, an inflated cabinet. It's not going to be a public sector solution. It's a private sector solution. And if you look at the growth required internally in South Africa, actual buildings, brick and mortar stores, it's almost unattainable to create the kind of growth we need to create healthy employment.
It's not going to be a couple points of GDP is not going to solve this problem.
Exactly. But if you look at and again, if you're a believer, I mean, and this is not really isolated to blockchain, but digital in general. If you look at the sector, right, the Coinbases of the world who are employing a number of people, the huge companies, they don't just have blockchain architects sitting there, writing smart contracts. They've got social media managers, they've got graphic designers, they've got PR people, they've got content writers. And the one time we can actually look at, a weaker currency relative to developed markets as a plus is, when our salaries are sort of getting denominated in dollars, because, a Coinbase hiring me remotely, which has been accelerated by COVID, sitting out in Nairobi, paying me, $1,500. For someone in New York, they probably wouldn't even show up to that interview.
Oh, for $1,500, it better be a day. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're speaking to someone in Kenya, a young, educated college student who's exceptional at graphic design, that is game changing. That's more than anyone locally.
Well, we saw that start to happen, particularly during COVID, when everything was. I've talked to U.S. based startup founders who say my last 10 engineering hires were out of Nigeria, for example.
Exactly,
and all remote, obviously.
Also very fond of Cape Town. I know.
Right. In this particular example I'm thinking of, this was said on stage in the States. I forget when. Recently, it was like, I'm hiring out of Nigeria now.
And as Africans, I feel like we need to be trying to accelerate that, right? By creating internal programs, upskilling programs, creating corridors, building bridges. So when I speak to that, I think that's the powerful opportunity here. But I think it's largely related to tech, and
it's related to the wage gap or the earnings gap between Europe and North America and Africa. So there's a smaller gap between the skill sets, if there is one, and a much larger gap between the expected wage expectations, right? So if I'm an employer in New York or Berlin or wherever, that's going to be very attractive.
Exactly. And I feel like that's an opportunity we aren't leveraging enough.
So are there ideas on platforms that could be created, and is blockchain a part of that? I'm not forcing the issue on blockchain on that, because this is an interesting topic independent of blockchain, right? But are there platforms being created that you would point to that are accelerating this movement? Because I think the pieces are in place for that to keep happening, right? Particularly, I think this year there's a lot of frankly downsizing that's been happening or will continue to happen, I think, for a little while, particularly in tech, particularly in quote unquote overstaffed tech companies. I'm not offering an opinion on whether they are actually overstaffed. That's a widely held opinion. Twitter is, the example people keep pointing to, but others are following and will following, Amazon, et cetera. There will still be work needs to be done, and they will want to find alternative ways to do it. I think it's set up to be something that will accelerate, in my opinion. But are there platforms helping that happen? I know was it Andela? I forget the name of it. Is one example. Are there others? And does blockchain play a role here?
So coming to the second part first, look, we haven't seen any sort of compelling ways that blockchain specifically, drives efficiencies in that sector.
Okay, fine.
But what did come to mind when you mentioned specifically those two examples, right?
Mhm.
So companies trying to operate more efficiently, drop their headcounts, but also platforms that are allowing these talents to service global markets. And the one that comes to mind, in fact, funny enough, I met at Big5 Digital, the conference last year.
Okay,
And
great.
it
Thank you
was,
for mentioning it.
yeah, I think you'll
Next one's coming
remember,
soon, everyone. Join us
I
in
think you'll
Cape Town.
remember
Yeah.
Zindi, the data science platform.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, essentially what they'd allow corporates to do is access this global pool African pool of data science, across the nation, of data scientists, whether they were students, whether they were, seasoned chief data officers at corporates. And they would put out challenges and problems, to this group, and people would provide solutions, get scored, the winning solutions, you transfer over IP, you get some money. But I think platforms like that specifically are ones that accelerate the adoption of
So ones that are focused on a specific skill set, right? Like this one particularly is data scientists, data engineers. Another one, developers in a certain language, maybe. I don't know. Blockchain developers could be one. Yeah. Okay. So are you seeing evidence that these platforms are forming? Or has anyone pitched you on one?
So we have not been pitched one as yet. And again, I think because blockchain doesn't really play.
Maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't be the one who get pitched. I've asked another VC. They may say, "Oh, I've gotten 10 of them."
No, I think that would definitely be the case, and I think the growth and success of platforms like Andela and Zindi are the first sort of indicators of that.
Okay,
and I do feel we'll see a lot more of these sort of job marketplaces, etc., coming up in the future.
Okay, that's interesting. We'll move on from there. I think it's roughly time to wrap up. Any sort of final thoughts on what you think the next few years look like for blockchain development in Africa?
I think what's good is that things look as they should. And what I mean by that is that, look, it is a relatively immature market. So one, the wider venture spaces, depending who you ask, only really 5 to 10 years old in Africa and South Africa specifically. And then if you look at the prominence of the blockchain space with the rise of the Valors and the Lunos of the world, I'm talking specifically in Africa, and the Paxfuls, etc. Again, that's even younger in terms of maturity. And when you look at the US markets, the European markets, that first wave of startups were all infrastructure and payments. They were all exchanges and DeFi and fintech. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here in Africa. So over the next couple of years, I do think, and like we spoke about, a lot of the compelling use cases that come to market are going to be in that remittance space, that fintech space, the payment space. But over a 5 to 10 year period, I'm quite excited to see what use cases come to mind, because people then will be able to build off of these financial primitives, right? Whether it be an API for credit score and another API for loan origination, and then wrapping that up securely in a DAO, for example. You need all of those foundational primitives to be built in your market to be able to start building that really cool, innovative, complex stuff, which I do think Africa will start to see, in the near future.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll end it there, Brenton. Thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you for mentioning the Big 5 Summit, which is coming up mid-March in Cape Town. We will see you there. And we hope to see everyone listening there as well. And thank you very much for joining. It was a lot of fun. And that's a wrap. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.